Children's church. I know some of you's probably in shock. You think that your Bill preaching that you got me. This is very hard for me. I don't can pull together in the prison or even other churches. Seems like that I can in my own church. And I thought a lot about that this week as I thought of maybe doing this. And you know, I don't know if we're afraid because we have such a personal relationship with the people we go to church with, or we don't want. Maybe I don't want you to look at me differently, but the truth is, you know, I have nothing to offer you except what God's done for me. That's it. And you know, I don't know if I'm more nervous or Bill that he's not here and I'm here speaking. So. He loves his church. You know, I've seen Bill preach in a hut anywhere. I've seen him preach everywhere. And he loves this church, and it's a blessing to be able to speak to you guys, and I'm thankful that I can. But I want you to hear, maybe you can relate to my testimony, and I want you to know, or maybe get a glimpse of how merciful and loving God is through what he's done for me. Most of you know me, my family. You know that I was raised in church. I have so many good childhood memories of going to Mill Creek Church. That church, when I was a kid, was in a transition a lot like this church is. A lot of new visitors, always doing workings, and I think they built a basement at that time, and just a lot going on. And it was a very apparent part of our community. All the kids that lived there, our family, we were always at church. Sunday school, church, Bible study, workings at the church, revivals. We used to go to Crane's Nest, and all the kids would ride their bikes. Just a good time as a kid. Probably about the same size then as this church is now. But sometime when I started becoming a teenager, my view of church and people like us began to change. And I know a lot of my testimony may even speak more to the youth, but I hope all of us can relate to it now. And it's not the fault of my parents at all, or how I was raised. But I began to fall into this trap of the world, right? Amen. I was obsessed with wanting to be like everyone else. This is the same today, I think, even with adults. Maybe more so with social media. Even if we don't live this life we put on Facebook, we want everybody to think we do. And, you know, Bill mentions a lot because it's so real. It's so in your face. It's like our relationships aren't real. It's only what's online. It's that everybody lives through this screen anymore. But even before that, I was still falling into that. I wanted and I was doing what everyone else was doing. My whole goal as a teenager was to impress people. I said this before social media. But I was doing what I wanted people to see. So before long, behind my parents' back, chasing girls, smoking, drinking, trying things I shouldn't. I knew better. But just like anything else that pleases the flesh, the more you do it, the easier it is.
Yeah.
By 14, I was in a lot of bad stuff. Now, by the world standards, I was probably a pretty good kid. You know, I wasn't in serious trouble with the law, decent grades, sports, good kid. But spiritually, I was a mess and really probably didn't even realize it. By 14 or 15, everything changed. So, somewhere around 14 or 15 was the first time God spoke to me. I remember it so clear. What happened was I had plans to go to a friend's house. It's hard for me to even talk about this because my parents are here. I know that for already had. But anyway, so I was going to go to a friend's house and I had no driver's license, and I'm sure we had plans of getting on ICQ for you. Hey, that's pretty Facebook. Right? Talking to girls inappropriately. Probably want to steal some beer off his stepdad or something. That's just trying to be real with you. That was my plan, but my mother said I had to go the last night of this revival before I went. Mill Creek. That's my daughter. So, this revival, I had to go to the last night of this revival before I could go to his house, and that was the first night that I realized my sin. I said, I remember it, the pew I was sitting in at Mill Creek. I realized that not only was I disobedient to my parents, but my life was full of sin. And the preacher made the altar call, and I was at war spiritually. And I stood there and not even realizing it, I was counting the cost of this fake stuff. I thought that if I would become a Christian that I couldn't party, right? I couldn't do these things. And I really thought that I could not change. I'll get more into that, but I stood there at war and I told God, no, not now. So time went on, I continued to live up to the world's standards, not God's. Continued in sin. I joined the military, boot camp, training in Florida, and more changes were happening. Anybody that's left home knows that you grow up quick when you leave home. The military's, they put you on a express route to that. But I was surrounded by people in Florida, and I've always kind of been an introvert. I could find peace being alone, but it was different down there. I was lonely all the time and began to get depressed and homesick and just wasn't in a good spot. Now, my life down there doing the military thing, but I was still trying to be like everyone else, right? Partying, drinking. Same routines as I was at home. I hit a low point in Florida. I was very unhappy. Nobody knew this but me, the battles I was facing. But I knew I needed a church. So, the way I was raised, but it was the mercy of God speaking to me, telling me where to go. I planned it out. I bought clothes. Found a church in Florida to go to. Went. And I watched people go in. It's another instance where I knew, it's like it was yesterday, and I watched these people go in this church, and I was lost, but I was talking to God at war. And I never went in. I chose the world. Blatantly told God, not now. It was my only hope was in that church. I knew that. But I didn't go. as time went on, I was deployed twice, and I saw a lot of stuff. I was in. God was reminding me since gave my life to Him that I've been this close many times, losing everything. That's the mercy.
Amen.
So I want to add that no matter where I was, home or boot camp or Florida deployed, there was always a godly man in direct contact with me. Someone that lived different than me and my buddies. Someone that was faithful to their wife at home. Someone that didn't get drunk. I thank God for those people. But the conviction would come and go. I continued to chase the world. Run from God. I got out. God blessed me with a wonderful wife. Now by 24, it looked as if I had everything together. By this time I was married, I had a good job, business owner. I mean, if the world drew us a roadmap, it looked like I was on it. But inside I was miserable. Our marriage was suffering due to the business. I was depressed. I was mad because I thought I had done all these things the world says I need to do, yet I was unhappy. I don't know if any of you can relate, but I thought I deserved to be happy. I wasn't. And in all this, Beth's pregnant. She gets pregnant. Patty. And when I look back, I hadn't had conviction for a long time, maybe a couple of years, and that scared me. While she was pregnant, conviction came back. That's the mercy.
Amen.
I knew that my little girl needed to be in church. So I started going to dwell. And this sounds crazy. I didn't know if I was going to share this with them. I would drive to church. Maybe somebody's there today. I don't know. I would drive to church and say, this is exactly what I'd say. I'd say, God, please don't give up on me, but I'm not getting saved today. That's what I'd say. Not today anymore. And that was my mentality. I think it's a lot of our mentality. That we can just choose when to put on Jesus and take them off.
Amen.
I had lived, it's now I see the foolishness in that, but it's basically what I've done my whole life. But one Sunday, and I was at a low point. The business was struggling. I had this new kid, and don't get me wrong, kids are a blessing, but hey, they're hard for new parents. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough on a marriage sometimes. Such a blessing, but there's stress there. And everything together was hard on Beth and I. But that Sunday, as the preacher preached, I saw Jesus for who He is. And I realized that after all that running, that He had never left. He had never backed up.
Amen.
And I believe that all that rejection, He loved me enough to die for me. It became personal that Sunday. Guys, I had mountains of sin. But He stood there and He took it everywhere. We go to the prison, but those guys ain't nothing on me. One sin, it's all it takes. He takes them all. So I went to the altar, and I don't know. I didn't pray a scripted prayer. I just said, I'm sorry. But I stood up forgiven. And I've never felt the fulfillment that I felt that day. You don't, if you haven't given your life to Him, you don't know.
Amen.
I want to see the verse He showed me. And I was reminded yesterday at Kairos of this. But He didn't, this is something you need to think about. He did not love me more that day than He loved me the whole time.
Amen.
His love is maxed out on you right now. He can't love you any more than He has. It's something to think about. I hadn't pondered that much till yesterday. And have I struggled since? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I get stressed. I'm overworked, and it's hard sometimes. But now, when the stress and the depression happens, when these feelings creep up, fleshly desires, lust, pride, they will creep up.
Yeah.
I don't have to be overpowered anymore.
Amen.
The war is over.
Amen.
The battle is won,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I can go to this Savior.
Bless Him.
He says, "Give me your burdens."
Jesus.
If you know Jesus, you know what I'm talking about.
Amen.
Yes.
Thank you, man, Jesus.
Last thing on this is, I can tell you I've done it all, right? I've traveled the world, the money and businesses, alcohol, drugs, whatever, and none of it will ever compare to what you find in Christ.
Amen.
And I just, don't be like me if you're in that state today of conviction. It don't matter what people think. He'll forgive you.
Amen.
I have a couple of scriptures if we got time to read. And I want to read these, but I know Bill does the same thing. You need to go back and read them. I don't want to take anything out of context, and I don't want to lead you wrong, but I just want you to consider this. God put these on me, and I'm going to pay for it if I don't read them. So,
Bless Him, Jesus.
this is Paul. He said, "I am not ashamed of the gospel because of the power of God." I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. First to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. I want you to see, like I said, please read this, but pride has kept so many people from this altar. Me, for 24 years, or all my life until then. But you need to get to know Paul. He was doing everything that the world said he needed to do to be on a good track, right? He was the top of his field. Everything he needed to do, he was doing it. But when he met Jesus, it all became worthless. When he saw the light, he knew that there was no power in the world. The only power was in this gospel that you hear here.
Amen.
That's it. So when your pride holds you back, you've got nothing on Paul. And he saw Jesus, and you can too. I hope I'm making sense with this.
Bless Him.
Last thing I want to read is Galatians chapter 4, first 7 verses. I'll start at verse 29 of chapter 3. It's as if you belong to Christ and you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. What I'm saying is that as long as an heir is underage, he is no different from a slave. Although he owns the whole estate, the heir is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. So also, when we were underage, we were in slavery under the elemental forces, spiritual forces of the world. But when the set time had fully come, God sent His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law,
Yeah. Bless Jesus.
that we might receive adoption to sonship.
Yeah. Amen.
Because you are His sons, God sent His Spirit of His Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave,
Yes.
but God's child.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
And since you are His child, God has made you an heir.
Yes.
Amen.
All again, inspired by God. I wish you could see the power that I see.
Amen. Bless him.
Amen.
You lost or saved, said, please read this. I don't want to take anything out of context, but I don't care what you're struggling with. You do not have to be a slave to it.
Amen. That's right.
We're in a county that is a mess with drugs. They're slaves. They're slaves to it.
Yeah.
But the power that we read about first in this gospel, there's nothing that can bind you to it when the gospel enters in. I hope that makes sense. When the Spirit that calls out Abba, Father, you don't have to be a slave to these things.
Amen.
Whatever's holding you back, whatever you're worried about, you do not have to be a slave to it.
That's right. Amen.
Right.
That's all I have.
Bless his Lord. Amen.
This today. I know our pastor's not here, but you can still get saved.
Amen. Yeah.
But I thank you for listening to me.